Today, we're talking about getting your poetry published. I get asked about this a lot because a lot of people are interested in the topic. And I'm like, yes, you too can have readers in the tens of tens. Hi, poet. Welcome to Low Effort Poetry School. My name is Catherine, and I am also a poet. So let's break it down. First, I'll give you an overview of the publishing landscape, and then I'll give you more detail on how to get your work published. There are essentially three types of places to get your poetry published: literary magazines, presses, and contests. There are nuances with all of this, so bear with me. I'm here to break it down for you as clearly as I can. In the poetry publishing ecosystem, first, you have literary magazines. Literary magazines are also called literary journals. I'll be using this term interchangeably throughout this video. So if you hear literary journals, literary magazines, I'm talking about the same kind of thing. Literary magazines publish poems individually. Sometimes they'll take a couple poems by the same poet at once, but they're not publishing a whole book. Unless they're also a small press, in which case they might take a whole book. But when you're going for a literary magazine, you're trying to get one or a couple of poems published at a time. Some lit mags are online, some lit mags are in print, and some have both print and online branches. Some literary magazines publish in issues like a normal magazine might. Other publications, especially the online ones, function more like blogs, putting out one piece a week or even daily. There are pros and cons to each type of publication, and it really comes down to your preference. For example, some people like the sort of specialness of being published in a print magazine, while other people like having an online presence so that they can have links to share with their followers. And the number of people who read it isn't limited to a print mag's circulation. Some literary magazines pay contributors money, but usually that payment is in the $10 to $100 range. It's not a ton of money being paid because literary magazines generally do not have the funds available to pay any more than that. Gone are the days of yore when a family of four could be supported by publishing raunchy verse in Playboy magazine. Some magazines don't pay anything at all. And in fact, most of them don't, because they are often run by people doing thankless work for no money. Nobody is getting rich running literary magazines, I can tell you that. Some lit mags are connected to universities. If those ones don't pay, it's because a university president somewhere does not respect the arts and is throttling the budget for the department and the literary magazine. So don't get mad at them either. It's not the students who are running the magazine's fault that they can't pay you. They'd pay you if they could. That being said, sometimes magazines do have fees to submit. Sometimes these fees are like $2 to $3 to help offset the cost of the submission manager. And in my opinion, it can be worth the money if you have the funds to support the magazine. Some people are willing to pay this cost, and some people submitting aren't. I have to say, I have also seen the fees creeping higher in recent years into the $7 to $10 range just to have a 3-poem packet read for something that's not going to pay you anything at the end. And in my opinion, that's a ripoff. So that's lit mags. We'll come back to those later in this video. And I'll tell you exactly what you need and how to do it. Then we have presses. Presses publish books. You've got your big 4 publishing companies, which is like Macmillan, Penguin. They keep combining. There used to be 5, now there's 4. They're the big ones. They're not going to publish you unless you're like a famous actor and you want to write some poems. Then I don't know why you're watching this video. Call your agent. Then you have your small to medium-sized presses. Small presses range in size from one person on their living room floor with a printer and a stapler up to professional productions with several employees printing thousands of books at a time. It really depends on the press. When considering where you want to be published and where you want to be targeting with your submissions, it really comes down to preference and finding a good fit for you and your work. Keep in mind, bigger is not always better. Your book might get lost in the shuffle at a big press with lots of titles, and you might get more personal attention at a smaller press that's willing to do more hand-holding with you if you're a new author. On the other hand, a bigger press might have a bigger budget for marketing, and it might print more copies of your book to get your book into the hands of more people. Some presses pay you in advance up front, but for poetry in the small press world, this is rarely any kind of significant amount of money. Definitely not the kind of money you can make a living off of. It's more like $250 to $2,000 if you win a big contest. Be sure to read your contract to make sure you understand what kind of payment you're being offered by your press. The third thing we have to talk about is contests versus open reading periods. Contests are run both by some presses and some literary journals. Contests can be for individual poems, chapbooks, and books. There are a few differences between an open reading period and a contest. A contest usually has a name, is run at regular intervals, like yearly, has a reading fee higher than a normal fee, and a larger monetary prize for winning. The winning book is also always offered publication. That's part of the reason that you want to submit to contests, if you do want to submit to contests, so that at the end, they'll publish your book. There's usually one winner, a short list, and a long list. Sometimes books from the short list are also offered publication, but maybe with a reduced prize. Open reading periods are more likely to be free or lower cost than contests are. And they are primarily used to select books to fill out the entire catalog and not just picking one book at a time. Reading fees for book contests are often $25, $30. I've seen $40, $45, and competition is very steep. So you really want to be tactical about which contests, if any, you send your work to. And you want to be sure that your work is ready to be read and that you're sending your very best. Personally, I'm on the fence about submitting to contests. My first book was a finalist in one contest, and then it wasn't offered publication, but then another publisher heard about the contest and my manuscript, asked to read it, and then ended up publishing it. So even though the original contest didn't publish my work did eventually end up being published because I had entered a contest. There's also self-publishing, but that's a whole other video. Oh, and in case you were wondering what the difference between a chapbook and a full-length collection is, it's a page number thing. Books of poetry are generally considered full-length if they're 48 pages or more. Chapbooks are shorter than that, and micro chapbooks are usually, I think, 10 pages or less, though I don't know if there's a hard and fast rule for micro chapbooks, but chapbooks are shorter than 48 pages. Full lengths are longer than 48 pages, generally. Presses will tell you what they're looking for in their submission guidelines. Because they're shorter, chapbooks tend to be more unified thematically, whereas full-length collections usually have a couple of themes that are interlocked. This is not a hard and fast rule, it's just something that I've noticed. You may be wondering how you get published. There's an order of operations. You want to start by publishing in literary magazines. It's much easier to get noticed by presses if you already have been published in a number of well-respected literary magazines first. Most journals want to consider more than one of your poems at a time. So if you've only written one poem, I'm gonna give you some tough love and say you have not yet written enough poems to be worrying about submitting them anywhere yet. How many more do you need to write? I'm gonna say you need to write 10 or 20 more poems at least. Some people are gonna laugh at this and say you need to write hundreds of poems before you can even think about submitting them anywhere. I'm not that precious about protecting your early work from being seen, but you need to at least have written 10 or 20 other poems to start picking how you can figure out what are your best poems to send. Okay, so you've written some poems. Your next step is to read the submission guidelines on your favorite literary magazine. What's this? I'm hearing you don't have a favorite literary magazine? Do you not read literary magazines? And you want them to publish your work? Well, Okay, I'm gonna let you off the hook now because you might not have known about literary magazines, but a big part of what you will be doing as a poet should be, if you want to be published, reading contemporary work. One of the places that you find contemporary work, the cutting edge, is in literary magazines. So how does one find literary magazines? I'm glad you asked. One method is to search or browse websites like chillsubs.com or Duotrope or Submittable. There's like a Discover tab on Submittable that you can scroll through and it will show you opportunities to submit. You can also look in the back of your favorite poetry collections and see where the individual poems were first published and make a list and then look up those literary magazines online and see if they are taking submissions. So, how do you decide if a literary magazine is a good fit for you? First of all, you have to read the literary magazine. Just check out a couple issues. Ask yourself, do those poems have any kinship with the poems that you're trying to submit? If the vibe is wrong, move it along. One of the things that ChillSubs and Duotrope, websites that aggregate these literary magazines, do is they collect data about different stats, such as how long it takes for them to get back to you and what percentage of submissions are accepted for publication. These measurements can be a good way to figure out if a literary magazine is a match for your work. If you're brand new, it's okay to submit to a literary magazine that accepts 25 to 50% of the submissions that it receives. It's also okay to submit to very selective literary magazines, but you should have a pretty good idea that it's going to be harder to get into a magazine like that if you're brand new. Okay, once you've found a literary magazine that you're interested in submitting to, you want to carefully read the guidelines for submitting to this particular literary magazine. You're going to want to follow the instructions exactly. If they ask for 3 to 5 poems, do not send 6 poems. If they want Times New Roman 12-point font, you put that shit in Times New Roman 12-point font. Follow instructions. Now that we have that clear, let me tell you about what a submission consists of. There are normally 3 elements: poem document, the bio, and a cover letter. The poems are going to go in one single document, with each poem starting on a new page in that same document. Don't double up poems on a single page, let them breathe. Follow the literary magazine's instructions about what document format they want, whether it be a Word doc, a docx, or a PDF. If they don't specify or give me a choice, usually I opt for the docx. As for fonts, Garamond or Times New Roman are usually a safe bet, unless they ask for anything else in particular in the guidelines. Most journals want a cover letter and a bio. A cover letter for a literary magazine is not like a cover letter for a job. Basically, what you want to communicate in a cover letter here, the overall vibe, normal, respectful, and professional. You do not have to stand out in your cover letter. That's what your poems are for. Addressing your cover letter. You want to ideally address your cover letter with 1 to 2 people by name. You figure that out by going to the website and looking at the masthead page. The masthead is a list of people who work at the magazine. Some places are run by 1 to 2 people, some list a hierarchy of people. If there aren't jobs listed, but only 1 to 2 names, just use those people. Unless I know them personally, I use Dear first name, as opposed to something more informal like hi. Some people say Mr. last name, but I don't, because getting a gendered honorific wrong is incredibly rude, and I don't ever want to assume. If there are more than a couple people working there, address your cover letter to the poetry editor. Sometimes the website will actually tell you who to address your cover letter to, in which case you should just do that. If you can't figure out who to address the cover letter to, just say Dear Editors, and that works in a pinch. Introduction. Include a sentence that says what you're doing. I say how many poems I'm submitting, and I include the name of the journal. If it's a contest or I'm submitting to a specific themed issue, I say that at this point in the cover letter. I sneak in the fact that the poems are unpublished, because they usually are. Most journals don't accept reprints. I do this to build confidence that I know how this works. Titles. Sometimes I include the titles of poems. Sometimes I don't. Personally, I don't get the sense that this is a very important part of the cover letter, but sometimes I do it and sometimes it is asked for. Simultaneous submissions. Most journals I submit to are online and accept simultaneous submissions, though many established journals do not. I'm going to explain a little bit more about simultaneous submissions later in this video. I put in a sentence that indicates I have read and understand their guidelines around simultaneous submissions. It's about building confidence and showing respect for their time. Then I say thanks. I like thanks for your consideration because it says thanks in advance without saying thanks in advance, which is, I think, kind of rude to say. I sign off with sincerely and then my name, and then I attach a bio. Usually a bio is requested in the submission guidelines. I don't try to work a third-person bio like into the meat of the cover letter because that sounds hard to do, and I think it's just okay to put it at the end after I sign my name. So it's easily copy and pastable for the person reading the email if the poem gets accepted. Your bio can include your name, your pronouns, your geographical location, your publication credits, both forthcoming and existing, and like one interesting tidbit about you if you don't have enough publication credits to fill out those 75 words. I usually end my bio with a link to my website. Catherine Weiss is a poet and artist from rural Maine, living in Western Massachusetts. Their poetry has been published in Tinderbox, Passenger's Journal, Fugue, Taco Bell Quarterly, and elsewhere. They are the author of the Smash Mouth-inspired chapbook-length Golden Shovel, Fervor, as well as pro wrestling-themed Tet Besh poetry chapbook, Winners and Losers. Catherine's full-length poetry collections are titled Wolf Girls vs. Horse Girls and Grief Cake, with third full-length collection, Big Money Porno Mommy, forthcoming from Game Over Books in 2025. It used to look like this. Catherine Weiss is a poet and illustrator based in Western Massachusetts. Her work has been published in Up the Staircase Quarterly and Counterclock. When not writing, you might find her playing ping pong. More at catherineweiss.com. Both are okay and reflect different stages in my career. I have a folder on my computer that has a couple different bios of different lengths saved so that I can just copy and paste it whenever I do submissions or need a bio for something. I find that saves me a lot of time. And then I just go and update it when I need to update it. So you've selected a journal, you have attached your poems, written a cover letter, and pasted in your bio. Then, if you're like me, you agonize for 10 minutes about whether you have all your ducks in a row, and if you're really a good poet, and if you've ever really written poems, and if you should submit or not. And then you hit send. What happens now? You write it down and mark it in your submissions spreadsheet. This is crucial. Mark down the date, the journal name, what poems you submitted, and leave a space for what they say in response. The date they respond, and which poems they picked if they said yes. This document will be incredibly helpful for you in the future when you're trying to decide, where do I submit? Where have I submitted? What did I send them? This is how you're going to have the answers to those questions all in one place. Because what you don't want to do is send the same rejected thing back to a journal that already rejected it. You also need to be able to navigate simultaneous submissions. Okay, so simultaneous submissions versus multiple submissions. Multiple submissions means submitting different pieces to the same literary magazine before they have said yes or no to the first thing that you sent them. Most places do not accept multiple submissions. Simultaneous submissions is when you send the same piece or pieces to more than one journal at the same time. Most journals allow this, although some do not. What journals expect, if they accept simultaneous submissions, is that you notify them immediately if your piece is picked up elsewhere. What this means is if you send a piece to Journal A and Journal B, and then Journal B accepts it, you have to withdraw it from Journal A and tell them right away. The spreadsheet will help you remember where it is and who you have to withdraw it from. You can withdraw an entire submission or just one poem at a time, leaving the rest of your poems under consideration. What happens if you submit to a journal and then just never hear back? Sometimes a magazine will give you a timeline for when you can query, i.e. check in about a submission after a long non-response. Otherwise, don't pester them. You can always withdraw a submission if it's taking a really long time. Some magazines take years to respond, and it's kind of egregious, but sometimes it just takes a really long time. Eventually, you'll hear back. Most of the time, it's a form letter that says, "Not for us, good luck." The one thing you should never do is write back to a rejection letter. Definitely do not be rude. Do not say, "Oh, you guys suck, blah, blah, blah." No. This happens all the time, and you should not be the asshole that does this also. You don't even need to write back to say thank you. The editor has moved along, and don't bug them. Just keep it moving. Sometimes you'll get what is called a tiered rejection, which means no, it is a no, but it's also an encouraging no. It's a try us again in 6 months no. These encouraging rejections are good news. It means you're getting better. Every once in a while, you'll get a yes. It might take one poem or several from the selection that you submitted. They'll usually ask, is this poem still available? Which means, has no one already accepted this for publication elsewhere? At this point, you'll write back and say, yes, it is, and that you're so excited, and thank you so much. Then you wait for it to be published, which can take weeks or months. But then comes the day you are a published poet. Congratulations! You did it! So I hope this video was helpful. If you learned something new, I'd really appreciate it if you would smash that like button and possibly even subscribe to get more videos about poetry, writing poetry, reading poetry, submitting poetry, publishing poetry, being a poet, etc. I'm wishing you the very best of luck, and thanks for watching. It's blowing, gonna be massive. Sorry, Grandma, ate my acid. Do not eat the grandma meat. It's a wet heat at Dante's Peak. Ba, ba, ba.